Chaucer through the two poems that we just did. So that's The Death of Arthur, the two poems in Chaucer. The bulk of this, of course, being Chaucer. Now, let's look at a couple things that you're going to need to know for this. It'd be wise to jot them down. First of all, let's start with Chaucer. As far as Chaucer goes, you really need to know when he was born and when he died. So that would be about 1340 to 1400. There's some dispute about the first date, but we know he died in 1400. So Chaucer was 1340 to 1400. I find it easy to remember because he died at 60 and he died in 1400. At least that helps me to remember for some reason. Chaucer's characters in the prologue are crucial to your success on this test. So you want to review your quizzes on the characters and see what questions I ask you. They will reappear on the test, I'm sure.
All of them?
No, not all of them, just what I choose. I might word it a little different, but the information will be the same. If I did all of them, you'd have a 7-page test by the time this was done. But if you know the quiz questions on those characters, you will know the questions I ask on the characters on the test. They're almost all borrowed from the quiz. And if you restudy them and there's one you don't know, if you know most of the information about that character, you'll figure it out. So just review your quizzes for the characters. But we also had 2 stories that we needed to know. And the stories were, the first one was about Chantecler. And what you should know about Chantecler is what was the main argument that Chantecler was having with Brit.Lit. Yes.
Do dreams have meanings?
Do dreams have meanings? It's really important that you know that. That's the main thing you need to know from that story. And I hope you recorded that good sneeze I just did. Okay. Brit.Lit believed that dreams did or did not have meaning. Did not. For example, you remember in the puzzle, she says, oh, you just ate something bad. You just need these herbs for digestion, and you'll be fine. You know, she just thought of all kinds of reasons why he had this ridiculous dream. But Chantecler, on the other hand, gave pages of defense in his behalf. What were some of the things he cited and talked about? Yes?
Aristotle.
Okay, Aristotle, he talked about great people. You don't need to know who any of them are for this test, but he used arguments from the Bible and great philosophers, and he used stories, like the story about the man who had a dream that his friend was calling him for help, and then after the man was murdered, he came to his friend in a dream and said, they're trying to smuggle me out in a cart of dung. Remember that? Okay, so he used stories and philosophers. That's mainly what you need to know. If you know what the argument was and which side each one was on, you're okay with that one. Okay, how about the story of the Partner's Tale? What do you need to know about the Partner's Tale? It's a story of 3 men hunting down what?
Death.
Death. Okay, they're hunting down death, and this old man, who we believe was death, tells them death is under the tree over there. Now, finding 7 or 8 bushels, how many was it? 8. 8 bushels of gold florins would not be death for everybody. If a good man found it, he might carry it back and build a church for the village, or he might do something like that and he might be fine. Why was it death for these 3 men?
Because they were greedy.
They were greedy, selfish, pleasure hunting. All they cared about was themselves and whether they got what they want. And after swearing to be as close as brothers, that money was all it took for them to want to murder one another. So the Partner's Tale is mainly, you just need to know what the theme was, the 3 men hunting death, and for them, money was death. Now let's go to, you actually, I think, have more questions on the Morte d'Arthur. Yes?
On the Partner's Tale, do we need to know that, like, the story about him telling it, or are you mostly going to focus on the tale he told, like the partner?
Yeah, because there was a bit afterwards.
Like, do we need to know about the prologue?
No, just the story. Yeah, and the lesson of the story, of course, was don't be greedy. Yes, and so if you're greedy, give me your money, and then we won't continue. Yeah, sure. It was the partner's tale. That's about all you need to know. Okay, thank you. Let's look at yesterday's quiz. How did you do on that?
Which one did we take yesterday?
We took Morte. It was a long one. I think it might, someone see if it's in the return slot. We should pass that back to you if it is. Because you can study that to answer these questions as well. I think if going over that is going to really give you quite a few questions on the test. So you need to make sure that you know that. Yeah, really. Okay. I can see here that the best thing you can do is study your quizzes, and you have them all, right? Okay, and that one, Cole, do you want to pass that out? Yes. Okay, Cole's passing the other one back to you. All right, now let's look at Chaucer for a moment. One of the things you need to know about Chaucer, did you find the list of his sayings? The list of his sayings, like one of them was murder will what? Out. Okay, murder will out. Another one was all that glitters is not. Okay, you are going to have some fill in the blank on those sayings. It's going to be worth 6 points. There will be 6 blanks in some of those sayings, so you want to make sure you know them, make sure that you have them.
Can you give us all 6 of those?
No, they're going to be chosen from the entire list.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're going to be chosen from the entire list, and there's more than 6 on the list. I think there's, what are there, maybe a dozen? So half of them. I think there's a dozen. Does anybody have, there's 18. Would you like Holly to read them out loud?
Sure.
Okay, let's hear it, Holly.
Wait, I have to go up.
Oh, you need to stand by me, right here.
Yeah. Okay, April showers, I'm guessing.
Yeah, April showers is a saying he started.
A night there was, as lean as a rake, every man for himself, to knit one's brows, bolt upright, to wet one's whistle, fresh as a rose, to see and be seen, child's play, love is blind, as busy as a bee, patience is a virtue, murder will out, all that glitters is not gold, strike while the iron is hot, let sleeping dogs lie, in one ear and out the other.
Very good. How did Chaucer say in one ear and out the other when he wrote it in Troilus and Cressida? A t'other ut it vent. Yeah, un ere et herd a t'other ut it vent. Okay, good. So those sayings, you need to know those, yes.
Are we going to have to know the things we memorized?
Are you going to need to know what?
Yeah, the quotes that we memorized?
No, you won't need to know your quotes or your vocab words on this particular test. Okay. But it would be a good idea to review Chaucer's, I gave you one sheet, it might be on the other side of the sayings, the bio. So on the same sheet you have the bio of Chaucer and you have the sayings on one sheet, which I hope you all have. If you don't, you want to take pictures of it from someone who has it. All right, now one of the things that I was interested in is I would like to hear from you for a few minutes about anything, when you take all the stories we've studied in the Middle Ages, because we're ending the Middle Ages now, we're going to be moving into the Renaissance. Tell me some of the things you've learned, just something you've learned about the people or the time period, any little thing. What's something that you, through all this literature, have learned about how people lived or what they thought? Sophie?
Even back then, people would write about like taboo things or like kind of inappropriate things, and it wasn't all serious like it makes you think. Sometimes when you look back at history, you think everything was just like serious. There's actually jokes and like people making fun.
Yeah, people are people in every time period. I hope everyone learned that. They still fell in love, they still made jokes, they were still honorable ones, there were still dishonorable ones, there were cheats and liars, and there were noble men, just like in every time period in history. So we've got that. What's some other little thing? I mean, like, they didn't have air conditioning. That's a little thing, but you know they didn't. They lived in those castles. We talked about the castles. What's another little thing you learned about medieval life There were some important things too that you learned. Yes, Alice.
They believe both like in God and in faith.
Right, very good point. At this time, they were merging this newfound Christianity with their pagan beliefs. Today is Halloween. It's a perfect example of that merging. They used to have a day that they loved to celebrate as pagans that happened at this time. They didn't want to give it up. And so November 1st, the church made November 1st All Hallows Day. Hallows means, like you remember when you memorized the Gettysburg Address, he said, we cannot hallow this ground. Hallow means sanctify or make sanctified. So All Hallows Day was a day honoring all the saints. And tonight we're celebrating like we have Christmas Eve, this is Hallows Eve, which eventually the V was taken out because a lot of times they do that in writing. They'll put E apostrophe E in or E apostrophe E for Eve. So we're having All Hallows Eve or Hallows Eve or Halloween is which it's become. So this is a sample today of how pagan and Christian beliefs were merged. Constantine, who became a Christian around 300s, I think, it was the Edict of Milan, he was instrumental in helping to appease the pagans by merging some of these different holidays. Christmas is another example. But we won't go into all that, except that Alice's point that they were trying to merge Christianity and pagan beliefs. How did you know that? Can someone tell me where that was seen? That merging?
Easter.
No, I mean in the literature that we read. In the literature that we read. Yes, Alice.
In the books, they talk about faith, like in the story, they talk about faith, but as the end part, they have like a paragraph like praising God or something like that.
Okay, good. And the same thing, they'll have something about faith, and a few lines later, something about Christianity, and it kind of goes back and forth, and you can see the blending and how they're trying to reconcile this, especially in the Seafarer and the Wanderer. We saw that a lot. Okay, what's something else you learned about the Middle Ages from all this literature? What did you learn about relationships between people? How about male-female relationships? I'm spoon-feeding you here. What did you learn? Don't sit there and tell me you didn't learn anything, because then I'm going to just cry and leave, and that will be the end of class. What did you learn about men and women's relationships in the Middle Ages?
Men were more powerful than women back then.
What's that?
Men were more powerful than women back then.
Okay, why do you say that?
Or had more status because of their different jobs and what they would do.
Okay, men definitely had more status. What did you learn about relationships between men, relationships between women? What did you learn? Think of Beowulf. Think of the mead hall. What did you learn?
They had many wives.
No, they didn't have many wives. A lot of them just had one. This was one of the things I talked about a lot, and I'm just going to curl up and die here right now. What did you learn about men's relationships? Let me get more direct. Yes.
They're more close sometimes, even than like their relationships.
Yay! The men, the comradeship of men. Remember how often we talked about that? That men's relationships were often more important to them than even their relationships with their wives. Remember in The Wanderer? Why was the man so grief-stricken? He might have had a family at home for all we know. All his comrades had died. What was he looking for? A new what?
Job.
A new group of men. He was looking for a new liege lord so he could work for him and meet with everybody in the mead hall. He called him a gold lord. Why did he call the lord that he fought with a gold lord? Yeah, but what would they do after a battle when they go to the mead hall besides feast?
They'd split the rewards.
They'd split the rewards, and that was up to the liege lord who got what. So his gold, his income came from his liege lord, and male relationships were really important because they fought together and they were friends. Male friendships were very valuable. And I can see why that would be the case in a warrior culture. It wasn't like Sparta or ancient Thebes where they were homosexual relationships. It wasn't like that. It was actually good, healthy male relationships, and that I think men are afraid to have today because we live in such a homophobic culture, which is too bad. Men should be close friends. Men who are friends, when I see a girlfriend that I haven't seen for a while, what's the first thing I do? I hug her. Men should be allowed to do that. Do they not have hearts? Do they not care? And yet, someone's going to say, oh, don't be gay. I mean, that's so stupid, right? Male friendships are important. I'll give you a little example. When I first got married, my husband, I was his friend. I was everything to him. He spent all his time with me. And it wasn't too many years into the marriage when I realized he needed some strong male friendships. I mean, when you get married, you cannot be everything to your mate. If my husband said to me, okay, you're married to me, you can't have girlfriends anymore, I think I might rebel, right? Because we have our needs met by different people in different ways. And when my husband started his men's group and he started getting these really close buddies that for years now have met once a week, it really made a difference in his life. It added a dynamic of richness to his life that I couldn't provide. We need friends, and I don't think it's healthy to get married and get rid of all your friends. Women don't do that, and men shouldn't have to do that either. And in the Middle Ages, there was no thoughts about male companionship and friendship being questionable in any way. It was really important. Why would that be so important in a warrior culture? Right, you have to fight for one another, and you fight harder for the people you care about. My father was telling me one time that in World War I believe he said they would train with the people they were going to fight with from the beginning of training. They'd put you in a group and you'd stay in that group all the way through the war. And then they changed that where they'd send you to different locations and you weren't with the group you knew, and they noticed a big difference in fighting ability. And they finally realized we need to have these guys be teams where they're trained together and they stay together the whole time because they care about what happens to each other more. They will fight harder. And, you know, he brought that up. I don't remember the illustrations he got, but I thought that makes sense. That's important. We are always going to fight harder for someone we know and care about, right? So there we go. All right, so that's something we learned in the medieval culture. We learned that male friendships were really important, that it was a culture of the mead hall and the gold lord, that they didn't have air conditioning. What else about their conveniences? How did they live? Where did they go to the bathroom?
The window.
What about castles? Do you remember how castle bathrooms were? I want to tell you, this gives the idea of swimming the moat a whole new meaning. Because I don't think I'd want to do that. The castle walls, a lot of them would have these, you can see them when you go see castles today. Out from the side of the wall, there comes these little jutting things. Well, if you're inside, you can sit here, there's a hole, and you can go to the bathroom, and down here's the moat. So if the moat was part of the sewage system, swimming the moat would have been quite disgusting. Okay, so what about the common person? Where did they go to the bathroom? What? Hopefully. I remember reading in A World Lit Only by Fire by William Manchester that some of the poor houses, they would go to the bathroom in their own yard. And it would just be awful. And I'm sure there were things similar to outhouses and holes and stuff to make it more, for people to be more sanitary. But they didn't have plumbing. They didn't have flushing toilets. They had to do something. You can't stop going to the bathroom because there is.
Chamber pots?
Chamber pots were used too. Very good. They would have a pot in the house, just kind of a round container. If you were somewhat well-to-do and had a servant, it was the servant's job to empty that every day. You could use it during the night, and they would throw it sometimes in towns. Towns are built, when I go in Europe, a lot of towns are built with, you've got your first floor, and then your second floor comes out like this, and there's this area under here. Because the people up here, out of these windows, would throw the sewage onto the street, and this gave you a safe place to walk. And they would yell, "Gardez-le," and they'd throw it out the window. And so that was another reason cities didn't smell so great. Garbage and everything in the street. You needed this little tunnel of safety. You know, I don't envy that part. We romanticize the knights in shining armor and the castles, and you never see in the movies where they go to the bathroom or what the streets look like, right? Okay, so what else did you learn about medieval life? How did they eat? What was a common disease of kings in the Middle Ages? Gout.
Eating too rich.
Gout was too much meat, not enough fresh food, and alcohol. Meat and alcohol contribute to gout. So that was a common disease. If you were rich, you could have lots of meat, and actually the peasants were better off because they had to eat more natural foods, vegetables and grains and stuff like that. How much sugar did they eat? None. They got probably, I read somewhere that what a peasant or a person in that time period, the amount of sugar that they ate in a year, the average American eats more than that in a day. So they didn't have a lot of sugar. Sugar was at this time being refined and being made available mostly to the wealthy, so now they could add rotten teeth to their gout. But they didn't, the peasants didn't have sugar. You know, they might have some honey, or they might get some fresh fruit, which has natural sugars. What else did you learn about the Middle Ages? Let's think about all the way back to Beowulf.
The Black Plague.
Okay, the Black Plague happened during the Middle Ages. Very good, Jaron. Okay, who can tell me something about the Black Plague? Yes.
It lasted for 3 years. And
It
killed 2/3 of Europe.
It killed anywhere from a third to a half, probably. But a lot of people died in the Black Plague, and it did have some reoccurrences where it would flare up again after it hit. Does anyone remember when it hit Europe about?
1347.
1347. Good girl. That's when it landed in Messina, Italy, on the island of Sicily. And you'll be seeing something else about Messina, Italy this year, because we are going to study a Shakespeare story that happens in Messina. So yay, Shakespeare's coming up. It's the Renaissance. Okay, so you learned that the Black Plague happened during this time. Did you want to get on my recording? Here. Okay. All right. So the Black Plague happened during this time. People died in the Black Death. What do you think that caused having the Black Death? Does anyone remember from your sophomore year? Yes.
Labor shortage.
A labor shortage. And because of that, more common people were able to move up in the labor market. So there was some advancement filling those positions. Before the Black Death, the guilds wouldn't let anybody in that they didn't handpick. But after the Black Death, they were more desperate for members, and so the common people sometimes got to advance because of this.
Would it be more of the common people dying, though, because they didn't have as much freedom?
Well, it depends. What was killing them in the Black Plague? What was carrying the disease? The fleas. The fleas were transmitting it to the people, and fleas could be anywhere in that time period. Even though it's interesting that some wealthy people would run to country estates that they had, and they would have people that would guard the roads and shoot anybody that tried to come close, so they could stay totally isolated, and some of those did survive because the rats with the infested fleas were mostly in crowded areas. Okay, also during the Middle Ages, we had the Black Death. Anything else? Let's think of all aspects of life. Oh, the other thing the Black Death produced, by the way, was apathy and things like trois Corbies, where they had sort of a hardened humor about death. They got real apathetic. It says in Manchester's book, it says that it quotes someone from that time period that said people were marrying without love, and because there weren't that many choices left, and that also parents would abandon their kids and kids their parents when the plague showed up on someone. It was a hard where feelings had been so racked by watching so many people die that people became hardened in their hearts because of the Black Death. Okay, so I may be asking you things about what you learned in the Middle Ages. Can you think of anything else? Okay, life was hard. You lived better if I knew which person here had the most humble home in this group, I could tell you that you live better than kings and queens did in the Middle Ages. Easy. First of all, you have hot water and toilets and showers. There's no one here who doesn't have those conveniences. You have a car. You don't have to ride your horse through the rain. You can just get in your car and roll up the windows. You can get places faster on smooth roads. You have a real advantage. And the people that lived in castles, the kings and queens, those castles could get so damp, they used to hang tapestries on the wall to try and cut down on the dampness. So what would happen to the back of those tapestries, do you think? They would get moldy. Is mold healthy? No, it isn't. Fires. Did all the smoke always go up the chimney? What about when a storm came? What happened to the fire? Smoke. Castles were full of smoke and mold and dampness. It was not always just lovely and wonderful. We go see them today. No one's living in them. So they're all fixed up pretty. And, some of them even have had, some of the places you tour even have had heat or air conditioning put in for the tourists in different places. But back then, life was pretty tough. All food had to be made from scratch. You couldn't go buy a box of mac and cheese at the grocery store. What about clothing? It's homemade. Everything had to be done. When you had a manor, remember your sophomore year when you all were on manors and you came up to bargain with your liege lord? You remember that simulation we did? Yeah. Well, you had some people growing what was needed to make. They had sheep or whatever, and they would turn that into cloth. You had other people that grew the wheat. You had another place in the manor where there was a mill where you could grind the wheat. Everything was self-contained. They had to feed and clothe themselves by hand. Okay, so these are important things to remember about what we learned in the Middle Ages. But the main thing I want you to remember is that they were just like you and me. I used to think when I was your age that really stupid stuff that people believed didn't exist anymore because we were too smart. Well, I can tell you, every superstition, every outlandish religion still exists today. There are still people who worship Isis, the Egyptian goddess. I saw a bumper sticker when I was going down the freeway. I worship Isis. Ask me about her or something like that. So I followed the person. She says, "Oh, we have a temple here in the LA area. I'd love for you to come and we worship the goddess Isis, and she's this and she's that." And I'm like, okay, because I thought those ancient religions were gone, right? They're not gone. Superstitions. You think people aren't superstitious today? Prejudice and greed and hatred, they're all still with us, right? You know, you look at in Star Wars, there's the scene where they're playing in that bar, and every being is a different weird creature. You know, yeah. What's the music? How does it go? No, please. Yeah, that scene, and they are all one happy bunch. But we're still fighting with people who have a different religion than us or a different color skin. I mean, we haven't really. You'd think after so many hundreds of years we'd get smarter, right? That we'd have more tolerance and get along. Nope. We're just like they were, only we have more modern conveniences and technology. And with technology, we can be even more effective when we have a superstition or a prejudice, which is sad. Okay, so that is our quiz. On the poems, that's the only thing I haven't discussed. It's mostly the things that you quizzed on today. So, someone tell me an overview of Trois Corbies and what it's about. Who can give me an overview? Tanner, can you? First of all, what does trois mean? Two. And what are Corbies?
Can't remember. Oh, yeah, the ravens.
Yeah, ravens. Two ravens. Okay. All right. Two ravens. Who can help him and give me an overview of the poem? Nobody? Patrick. It's the only one with his hand up. Okay, Patrick, go for it. Oh, did it? Sorry.
These two ravens were discussing how and where they should eat this dead knight who has fallen in a ditch. Right. He's fallen in a ditch. They're discussing about eating him. What do we learn about the knight from their discussion? What's something we learned, Tanner?
Just like some descriptions of what it looks like.
Right, descriptions of what he looked like. How did they happen to mention his looks?
Because
Because they were gonna take and use his body.
Right. He says, I'll eat his bonny blue eyes and you can take his blonde hair to thicken our nests. And they say there's a word there that makes me think he's a handsome knight, dead in this ditch. No one knows where he is. We find that out in the poem. What do we find out about the ones who had been with him? They're off doing stuff. Who are they? Who are the three that were with him? Daniel. Who was with him?
The dog, his wife.
No, not his wife.
His wife. Oh.
His lady.
His lady, and
Who can help him? Yes. His hawk. His hound, his hawk, and his lady fair. The hound was off what? Hunting. The hawk had gone to fetch the game for him. The lady had found a new mate, found a new knight to go with. So there he was. And he says, the end of the poem is kind of sad. They said, there he'll lay forevermore, and the wind is going to blow over his bare white bones because all the animals are going to eat him forevermore. And people are mourning him, but they don't know where he is. Now, why are we laughing about such a sad poem? I mean, we were laughing when I read this poem. Why are we laughing?
That was a type
because it
of.
was dark humor.
It's dark humor. It really is. You know, it's kind of like the thought of two birds discussing how they're going to eat this night, of course, is ludicrous as well. But it's the dark humor that came out of this culture where people had seen so much death and pain they just couldn't feel it anymore. What about, who can give me some things about get up and bar the door? Get up and bar the door. Someone besides Patrick, raise your hand. Yes, Annie.
Like tell you what it's about?
Yeah, give me an overview.
It's about this couple and the wife is like working really hard and making pudding and like doing all these household duties, and then the door like opens and then the husband tells her to go close it, and then she says, if that's my responsibility, it'll take forever for me to close it because I'm so busy. And then so they like have a competition of who can, like whoever speaks first loses the bet and has to go close the door. And then these like robbers come in because the door is still open, and then they are gonna eat the pudding, and then they need hot water because they're gonna shave the man's beard. And then they go to like kiss the wife, right?
Yeah, there's a lot in that.
And the husband like gets up and is saying, how dare you, how are you gonna kiss my wife like right in front of my eyes? And then the wife is really excited because he spoke first, and then he has to go.
Does she have her priorities mixed up a little bit? Yeah, she does. It says she jumps up and guys 3 times on the floor. So she's like this, yay, you spoke first, you spoke first. Meanwhile, she's about to get raped and her husband is going to be shamed and have his beard off. So I'm glad she had that moment of happiness because she's not in a great situation right then. All right, you guys, we have 1 minute till the bell. Have a good day.